and welcome to Life is Story Podcast. I'm Larry the Cucumber, and I'm here with Josh Olds. Take it away, Josh.
Larry, it's great to have you on the podcast, or are you better known as Mike Nawrocki, or like less known as Mike Nawrocki?
Well, I'm a little less known as Mike Nawrocki. Poor Mike doesn't get as many props as me, but he can go out in public more than me.
Yeah, that does make sense. So Mike, I thank you for being on the podcast program. I really appreciate your time. You are the author of the Dead Sea Squirrels, in addition to being the voice of Larry the Cucumber and doing so many things on VeggieTales. So I wanted to have you on this podcast because you have just recently, I think at the beginning of March, released 2 new books in the Dead Sea Squirrels podcast. Before we talk about that, though, I want to start with the question that I think I've been asking everyone the past couple of weeks, and that's just the world is crazy right now, and how are you coping with it?
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you, Josh. It's great to be on. And, so my wife and I live in around Nashville, Tennessee, in a little town called Franklin. And, we are, our 2 kids are college age, so they're back, doing online classes to finish out the semester. My wife works for Vanderbilt Medical Center as a medical interpreter. So she's, working from home, interpreting, and, she's been really busy given the current, medical needs of the country. And, it's crazy in a way, but in a way too, we've been really appreciative of the fact that we're all home, we're all safe. In some ways, we had just become empty nesters, and we're sort of grieving that. And now, we've got a full nest again. So there's a lot that we're appreciative of as well, but just, praying for the health of, those around us, for our country, and, all the while trying to, just sort of rest in this reality and be content where we are and thankful for the things that we do have. So, but it is a crazy new world right now.
Yeah, it's such an interesting time that we wouldn't, if you had told us a month ago that this is what we would be doing with our lives, we wouldn't have believed you. And I'll actually say someone did tell me, a doctor friend of mine told me in the middle of February, if this gets really bad, we're going to be under quarantine. And I kind of brushed it off at the time and was like, I get that's what China's doing. I don't see it happening. And no, he was absolutely right. Unfortunately, absolutely right. And we're just hoping for the health and safety of everybody in this time. And just very, very thankful for technology that allows people to still get together. To still have entertainment, like this podcast program, to still be able to have some semblance of a normal life amid all the craziness. So let's talk about the Dead Sea Squirrels. This is a kids chapter book, and I think books 5 and 6 just came out at the beginning of this month. So let's start though at the beginning. And what's sort of the overarching story who are the Dead Sea Squirrels?
So the Dead Sea Squirrels are an old Jewish couple named Merle and Pearl Squirrel. And I'll back up even a little before that. So the very first book starts off with Michael. He's a kid who's just going into the 5th grade. It's a summer just before his 5th grade year. He's in Israel with his dad, who's an anthropologist. And Michael has brought his buddy Justin with him. They've been friends since kindergarten, so they've been spending the summer together, kind of on this dig in Israel. And they go exploring a cave against the wishes of Michael's dad, who told them to never go into a cave alone. But nonetheless, they're in this cave, and they run across these 2 salt-encrusted, dehydrated squirrels that Michael thinks are the coolest thing in the world. Justin thinks they're disgusting, but Michael figures if he can smuggle them back home with him, they'll be rock stars, in the 5th grade. And so, he stashes them in his backpack and sneaks them back home with him to Tennessee, just as souvenirs. He's about ready to show them off at school, but the night before 5th grade starts, he sets them up on his windowsill, with the window open, on a dresser. and they get rained on, and they rehydrate and come back to life. And so their backstory is that there are a couple squirrels who grew up in the first century and around the time of Jesus and the apostles, and so they bring that knowledge of the early church and that first century with them into the modern world, and are able to share stories and lessons with Michael and his friends who are dealing with the things they deal with in the fifth grade. So that's the basic premise of the series.
Mm-hmm. So what was the start of this for you? What makes you go, yes, thawed out ancient squirrels that teach us about life. That's what I'm going to write about.
Well, I had the concept for this idea a number of years ago, and it sort of was VeggieTales related in a way, because with VeggieTales we obviously told stories from the Bible, lessons and values. But one of the things that we were restricted with was showing Jesus in VeggieTales, because we never wanted to portray Jesus as a vegetable. We just felt like, the show was so cheeky and we had so much fun with it in every other way, but we really wanted to draw the line there and say, you know what, this is sacred. We don't want to cross this line. And so that limited the amount of New Testament stories we could tell. And so I was coming up with an idea for a property that could do that. And, so I started, sort of formulating in my mind over the years. And then when I left Big Idea full time in 2016, I just started to develop it a bit more. And a friend of mine who actually represents me as a literary agent encouraged me to say, hey, this sounds like a great idea for a chapter book. Would you like to, maybe think of it in that sense? And so I sort of directed my energies that way, and then came up with the book series.
So you've been involved in like film and film writing, of course, for a while. Had you ever sat down to try to write a book before?
I had done a couple of one-off books for VeggieTales over the years, but really nothing, very, very short, and maybe like little rhyme books. But yeah, this is the first time I've actually gone in and written, something of this length to be read. Like you said, I've been more about screenwriting. I'm a trained screenwriter, but so to actually, kind of shift formats was challenging, but it was also a lot of fun and very freeing in a lot of respects. One of the things that, sort of an adage of screenwriting is show, don't tell. And it's such a visual medium that you leave so much up to, visuals. But when you just being able to write internal dialogue and thought processes and kind of narrative description was really a lot of fun. And so, but I still sort of approached it as just story structure wise, as if I were writing it for an animated series. And so, one of the things I'd love to do with it eventually is make it into an animated series. And I think it'll translate very, very easily to that. But in terms of format, if your listeners are familiar with the Captain Underpants series, there's a lot of illustration. So pretty much every page has an illustration. So for even reluctant readers, it is very visual. And I think that's one thing that I was able to carry over from, my screenwriting discipline, is knowing that, okay, I'm writing this page right now, but I think if I call out this type of visual, I think that's going to be very descriptive. So I'll be able to kind of lean on that a little bit. And so, after I would write, I'd make little illustration notes and say, okay, this is the type of visual that I think we should have here. So, but yeah, it was just it was a learning process for me, but also a lot of fun and very rewarding getting to do this.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned the illustration, so let's go ahead and talk about that. Hey, just really, the books just have this really great comic book feel to it, like you mentioned Captain Underpants. Was that the plan from the beginning, to be like, okay, this is how we can make this stand out? We've seen this format work over here with this, wildly popular series, and we're going to take from that to say, this is going to help draw kids in, especially those who may not otherwise pick up a book.
Yeah, exactly. My kids are in college age now, but both of them growing up were just avid readers, and they loved, they would just devour books. And, a lot of that started when they were really young, when we would read to them. And then later, my son in particular, Michael, who, a lot of the, his relationship with his buddy Justin is based off my son's relationship with his friend Justin at that age. He really got into those, like Magic Treehouse and Captain Underpants and Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Those books that were, 7,000-8,000 words per book, but then also, heavily illustrated. And so, I just thought that it just sat in that nice pocket for reluctant readers, but kids who still love to read, but, enjoy it a little bit more with some visuals thrown in.
Mm-hmm. So through the books, I think it tells one, like there's a continuing storyline throughout all 6 books so far. If I might be wrong on that, because I haven't read all of them, but also each book kind of has its own sort of moral lesson or thing to be learned from that. So as you're developing that, do you have an idea of what you're going to focus on for that book and how that's going to work out with the overall storyline?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, there is an overall storyline through each book, and I'll hint at it here. I won't give away too much, but there's when Michael comes back to the States, back to Tennessee with his squirrels. He's tracked by a mysterious figure, the man in the suit and sunglasses, and he's a recurring figure throughout the books, trying to take the squirrels back where they came from. And the squirrels aren't interested. The squirrels are actually not from the Dead Sea. There are no squirrels in the Dead Sea. They sailed down on a raft on the Jordan to vacation, and so they're not wild about going back to the Dead Sea because it's so hot and dry there. And so they want to stay, but there's that intrigue of this mysterious figure trying to get them back, and so they're sort of trying to avoid him, and that's sort of he's the overarching villain of the first series. But within each book, there's a biblical principle, and each book, starts with a key biblical verse that's reflected in the theme of the story. So the first book is obeying your parents, and Michael, who's not supposed to go into this cave, ends up doing it anyway and gets himself in a bunch of trouble doing that. And it just reflects that theme of why we should listen to our parents and obey our parents. Later in the series, each book has a chapter called a Squirrel's Eye View, where Merle and Pearl remember back to the 1st century and how what Michael is going through has an answer in the teachings of Jesus or the apostles. Loving your enemy or treating others like you want to be treated. They'll remember the Sermon on the Mount and kind of how Jesus taught that and how that applies to their lives today. So each individual book has a specific theme, much like VeggieTales in that sense, to teach a lesson through a story.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There's also a portion of each book that's called Dr. Gomez's Historical Handbook, which talks a lot about the history of the Dead Sea Scrolls. I think that's interesting because obviously it's kind of a play on words with the title of the series. But the Dead Sea Scrolls otherwise are kind of famous, but also probably obscure to a lot of the age of your audience is probably not aware of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So what made you decide? Did this start off as like, oh, this is a good pun, and all right, now we're going to figure out how to actually tie that in, and give some historical background to all this as well.
Yeah. One of the things that I fell in love with very early on, as I concepted this, it actually came to me as a title before anything else, because the idea of these ancient receptacles of wisdom, which is, obviously part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, these ancient writings that were discovered in a cave in Israel in 1946, kind of personifying that, in the pun of squirrels, here are these ancient creatures, who can mysteriously speak English, who come into the modern day, and have have something to say and have have this knowledge, from ancient times and this firsthand witness. So that tie in itself, that the title was just really intriguing to me. And then so it really started with that, and then building up. Okay, well, what kind of, obviously the characters are going to be squirrels, and so what are their personalities like? How can we have a lot of fun with them? How are they the same but different from each other? And making them a married couple, and sort of grandparently, for Michael was kind of fun as well. So yeah, just every step of the way, kind of building off of that idea of these ancient creatures or ancient artifacts who have this treasure of knowledge coming forward in the modern day. We just really paralleled the scrolls, and we just thought it was important at the back of each book to kind of point to that for kids. It's like, okay, this is the real world thing that this idea is based off of, and so we point that out in every book.
Yeah. So what are your future plans now for the Squirrels? Do you have an endpoint, of this series to say, okay, this is when this story ends? Do you see yourself expanding out into other book ideas in the future? What's the future got for you?
Well, so I do. I'm now working on books 7 through 12 of Squirrels, and right now, currently, my thinking is that'll sort of round out the overall story. The book 6 still, kind of gives us a little taste of more to come. But I think in book 12, I'd love to kind of round it out into its own kind of world and kind of tie it up. And then there's possibly, what I would love to continue doing, because I think what the series does so well is just have that interaction between, these ancient squirrels and these modern kids. And there, could potentially be other sort of modern adventures that they go on. But, this current storyline, I'm planning on wrapping up in 12 books.
Okay. All right. Now I want to transition a bit, and we need to talk VeggieTales. I think you've probably not done an interview in a long time that didn't include VeggieTales of some sort. But you're actually doing new episodes of the series now, correct?
Yeah. So Phil Vischer and I, Phil's Bob the Tomato, of course, he and I were contacted by TVN, who licensed VeggieTales. As I mentioned, I left Big Idea full time in 2016. I ran the sort of the home video unit, so all I did was develop, write, and direct the DVD series for VeggieTales. And so our last DVD was the story of Noah, which released in 2016. So I've been, I haven't been with the company since then, but Universal Pictures owns the intellectual property for the series, and TVN approached Universal and did a licensing deal. And so then they reached out to Phil and I to do writing and voices for the series, which we've been doing for the last year and a half or so. And so there's 26 new episodes, the first of which was a Christmas episode, which released last November. But then there's 25 more coming. I think things probably were held up a little bit with what's going on in the world right now with the COVID crisis. But I know there's a ton of new shows in the pipeline, and TBN is launching a new subscription video on demand service called Yippee, where the shows will premiere, and they're planning on, once they start releasing, which I think is a little later this summer, maybe June or July, there'll be one new VeggieTales episode a month, for the next couple of years, and so we're really excited about that.
Yeah, so it really seemed like VeggieTales was going to be done completely there for a while. So to come back to it, it must be interesting for you, I think, because you kind of have that. Okay, this huge part of my life seems like it's done. Oh, now it's back. Now I'm back into it. What was that like for you?
Yeah, it was really neat, and you're right. It has been such a huge part of my life. We created the first show, Where's God When I'm Scared, back in 1993, when I was in my 20s. And, I had the whole property, and I spent, my whole career up to that point, 25 years, with VeggieTales. And the characters and the show was such a big part of my life. And Larry, the character, was such an extension of my own personality that it was really hard initially, and to not be able to do that anymore, just because I was so in love with making the show. I was so in love with hearing fan reaction and what it meant to people. So when the opportunity came back up to dive back in, it was just really neat. And I remember that first voiceover session, just signing on as Larry again when I did that. That was probably early last year sometime. When we started recording the new shows, it was just a really special time, and so I love it. Phil, the new show we're going. We're using the traditional character designs for VeggieTales. Mm-hmm. We've gone back. Phil and I are doing most of the writing for it. There's some other folks, really talented folks, helping out as well, doing all the voices. Junior Asparagus is back. Lisa Vischer, who voiced Junior for years, is back doing Junior's voice, and Kurt Heineke, who did all the music for VeggieTales, is back doing music. So in some ways, it feels like getting the band back together, and the show really feels familiar, and hopefully can reach a new generation of kids.
Yeah, I think the big selling point that I remember when I first heard about this was, we're going back to the original character designs, because even though the two series that you guys did on Netflix, I think was very enjoyable, especially for us people who grew up on VeggieTales, who were kids, and seeing that, and like for our kids, we're like, oh well, you get discount VeggieTales. This isn't the same. The nostalgia wasn't there. To see that, like, all right, we're going back to the original, not the stories, or hopefully they're as good or better, but just to be like, okay, this is what I'm familiar with. It really has this ring of nostalgia to it for so many people who grew up on the original show.
Yeah. I think I think that one of the biggest things with the Netflix series, and while I think if you kind of remove the fact that people were familiar with a certain look with VeggieTales, I think the designs of the new characters themselves were really great. It was great art, but it wasn't veggies, so it just wasn't the characters that people were used to, and so I think that was really difficult to get used to. And the other, and then I think the pace of the show as well. They were designed as 11-minute shorts, much more cartoony. Where VeggieTales, Bob and Larry were used to, it was a little bit of a slower paced show, designed more for smaller kids, but yet in a way that, with the type of humor that allowed for, older kids and even adults to kind of click with. And so, that's what we've wanted to go back to with this new series.
Mm-hmm. And I will be honest that as a youth pastor, and I mainly teach high schoolers, I have used VeggieTales episodes to introduce storylines and books of the Bible before, because even as high schoolers, we can finish a half-hour episode of VeggieTales and still come away with great discussion questions and comparisons to the biblical text, and well, they changed this aspect of it, why do you think they did that? And
right.
It worked. Like it really did. The first one that I introduced, that I ever tried it, then it was more of a, hey, you kids are kind of the generation that isn't as familiar with this, so I'm going to share some of my childhood with you. And and then Sunday school's running half an hour over, and I'm like, all right, the main service is already started. We have to go, guys. We have to go. And like, well, can we do that again? And so I think it just shows that, like, yeah, really, there's so many different age groups can enjoy that work. It's been like almost 30 years since this started. How do you feel like the characters have changed over that period of time?
Yeah, it's actually very hard for me to watch the first 3 shows or so of VeggieTales, just because, Larry's voice was completely different. It was lower and dopier, and he had a lisp. It was really a lot of the character voices that Phil and I used in those early shows came out of our puppeting quiver. So we had Phil and I met doing puppets, and so we transferred a lot of those voices over. But I think as we matured, as voiceover artists and writers, and the characters themselves grew and matured and became a little bit more sophisticated. And I think with real personalities, I think the tendency is when you're creating characters is to create caricatures. But we spent so much time with this ensemble group of vegetables that they each kind of developed their own personalities, which were sort of offshoots of our own personalities. And so I think they were just able to grow and mature, and people were able to kind of get to know them as very familiar, and especially with kids, these are get to know them as friends. So I just think that kind of that development of the characters into, real, just vegetables who felt like real people over time. There's something about just the length of time that they ran, and, how we matured as writers and actors, to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. One more thing that I want to ask you about, and then we're going to get into some guest submitted questions. You mentioned before we started recording that you had just started a few months ago a podcast called The Bible for Kids. Can you talk to us about that and how that got started and what it's about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I co-host the show along with Amy Parker, who is a fellow children's author, and we're both represented by Dan Lynch at Brentwood Studios, who does our literary representation. And so we decided to start this podcast as a resource for parents, teachers, anybody who works with kids who wants to bring biblical values into their lives. And so, kind of like what you're doing here, we interview a lot of authors, a lot of kids authors, but then also, artists, pastors, youth pastors, folks who are speaking into the life of kids, and to, bring them resources the best way we can. And so, we've been doing, I think we've done probably about 40 or so podcasts by now, but I really have been enjoying it. I mean, just reading and doing all the prep work, and it's kind of nice with Amy being able to bounce questions back and forth between the two of us with authors, and we record over at Way FM, the Way FM studio, and so it's part of the Way Nation lineup of podcasts. So a lot of it is in studio. We'll have a lot of guests come and actually be with us. A lot of who we interview actually live here in the Nashville area, or we'll do over kind of over phone or over Skype as well. So so it's been really a great experience for us.
Yeah, it sounds like something that I'm going to check into. All right,
Please
so
do.
I posted on Facebook yesterday that I would be interviewing you, and asked some of our listeners if they had any questions. So some guest questions before you go. And this first question actually comes from my wife, so you can ignore it if you want to. But she asks that if your lips moved to Duluth, left a mess, and took your tooth, what would you do?
I'd be so sad. I'd call my dad. That's what I would do.
Okay. All right. Just I think that she already knew how you would answer that. Yeah, that was I called from the other room when I was doing the interview prep. I'm like, what do you want to ask him?
That's a great question.
I got maybe that wasn't the only one, by the way, but that's the only one that I'm going to inflict upon you.
All right. I love that.
Asha Fuller asks, "What's the funniest thing that a kid has ever said or done to you?"
Oh man. Oh boy. That's really hard to
pin down.
Answer. Yeah, that's hard to pin down. Oh boy. Funniest thing that a kid has ever. All I think about, the first thing that comes to my mind is parents of really young children being very excited when they meet me in person to have me do the Larry voice for their child. And it's funny for everybody else except for the child, because the child is terrified when I break out the Larry voice. Like,
Hey, how you doing, buddy?
They typically will cower in fear. It's like, who is this man, and why did you eat Larry? But yeah, usually when the kids are older, they can kind of grasp that. Okay, yeah, this is a cartoon character that his voice is done by a 6'5" dude.
Yeah, that's kind of the cognitive dissonance, I think. For sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Beth Half asked it. Well, I guess you've already answered this question, but her question was, have you ever used that voice in public, and what have the reactions been? So I guess that answers that question. Right there.
Yeah, well. Yeah, and I speak to college college chapels and all that kind of stuff, and so I always break out, I always lead with my Larry voice, and and particularly college kids this day, who many of them grew up on VeggieTales. It's been part of their childhood, so it always gets a really great reaction. And another thought that I just had too was I remember visiting my brother's church. And a couple came up to me. They were trying to potty train their child and was wondering if Larry could give them some encouragement. And so I actually did that as Larry, spoke to them as Larry. I think I recorded a message or something just, to kind of, keep the illusion up. But then I heard later that, yes, they took Larry's advice and, actually, stayed on the potty like they were supposed to. So I've got that going for me.
So you have you could have a little side gig going on then of just like recording parenting statements. Go clean your room, stay in your bed.
Exactly. If you're not going to listen to your parent, listen to Larry.
Yeah, you could just a short, just a short like CD or something of Larry statements.
I love that.
Rachel asks, what do you hope is the most lasting impact that you've had on kids?
That's a great question. And I do think, really at the end of every VeggieTales episode, Bob and Larry sign off with, always remember, kids, God made you special and he loves you very much. So I think for me, it's like if that message can just be etched in the hearts of kids, for their lifetime, to know deep down that they are loved and cherished by God and made special by him, that he loves them, he made them, he wants a relationship with them. That's the lasting value I hope we can offer with VeggieTales.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, last guest question for you, and then I'll let you go. Calvin wants to know if you've heard the trap rap version of VeggieTales, the theme song by Sean.
Yeah, I love that. I actually sent a thank you message to that. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy, but
Shama
just
Rama.
Really, what's that now?
Shama Rama.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was great. And actually, we reached out to him with a new VeggieTales episode to do some new covers for the new series. So it was just really, really clever, and I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, I thought it was absolutely great. All right, well, Mike, Larry, thank you for taking time out of your day to be on the podcast. The books are, let's see, I have to look and make sure I get the right two. The two newest ones are the Tremendous Treble and Whirly Squirrelies. They're books 5 and 6 of the Dead Sea Squirrels, and you should also pick up the first 4 as well. They're very well priced. And they're really good. They're really short reads, but great for kids, great for younger kids. Good chapter books. Really recommend them to everyone. So, Mike, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Josh, thank you so much for having me on. You have a great rest of the day.
Hello,